First of all, thank you very much for inviting me. I'm so sorry that I wasn't able to join you in Budapest, and I hope that there will be soon another occasion to meet there. So it is difficult to think of a problem which today in Italy is not only politically but also legally more contentious than the independence of the judiciary. And it is so not only because we have a tradition, at least in the last 30 years, of very hot debates concerning the respective roles of judges and politicians, but also because today, Italy is facing at the same time a constitutional reform concerning the organization of the judiciary, and in particular the role of the Judicial Council, which safeguards the independence of judges, but also because for the reasons that I will explain in the next few minutes, there will be a popular referendum in April or March 2026 concerning precisely these issues. So what I will be doing in the next 15 or 20 minutes is to say basically three things. The first one, as you can see on the screen, is that if we consider a judicial independence as the principle by virtue of which judges must make decisions free from any type of outside influence, pressure or control, including from the other branches of government, and in particular the executive branch, political factions or parties or private entities, then if we consider various indicators of de jure judicial independence, it can be said that judicial independence is adequately respected in Italy. Nevertheless, there are two main difficulties with it, and both deserve attention. On the one hand, while judicial decisions increasingly deal with issues that are not only legally but also socially and economically important, including, for example, issues which were previously left to the private sphere, such as abortion or the right to die, and as well as access to prenatal care or access to universities, and thus have an unprecedented social importance, there's a problem with judicial accountability. And that is so because there is an increasing demand for judicial accountability, and there is a widespread feeling that such demand has not been adequately met, at least thus far. And secondly, we must consider also the consequences of the rise of populist parties. Now, let me say at the outset that I'm a public lawyer, not at all a political scientist. But I think that if not political events in themselves, at least the legal and constitutional ramifications of political events should be considered by public lawyers. And that is so in Italy because, as I said at the outset, there is now this judicial reform which involves splitting the roles and the careers of prosecutors and judges and creating new governing bodies. Now, since this constitutional reform has not received the two-thirds majority which is prescribed by the Constitution, it will only become effective if it is approved by the people by way of referendum. So these are the three issues that will be considered in the following few minutes. I would be grateful to the organizers if they could move to the next slide, which concerns the guarantee. Yes, thank you so much. Which concerns the guarantees of de jure and de facto judicial independence. By de jure, I refer to all those elements which are established by the Constitution, formally intended, or by other institutional elements, while de facto guarantees, which can be and often are equally important, concerns, for example, the protection of salaries and the prestige of the judiciary. Now, from this point of view, we can say easily that in the Italian constitutional settlement, judicial independence is protected for two reasons that are related but distinct. First of all, it is regarded as a value in itself, and there are constitutional provisions such as the most important one, Article 104, according to which the judiciary shall be autonomous and independent from all powers. And you can see here the lasting influence of the ideas of Montesquieu about separation of powers. But at the same time, judicial independence, arguably, can be regarded as a means to achieve other values, and in particular, a judicial impartiality, the sound administration of justice, and the confidence of the citizens in the judiciary, which is a necessary element for achieving obedience to the law. Now, that said, as I said earlier, there are several requisites of judicial independence. There's a guarantee of institutional independence. In my slide, you can see on top of the slide on the right, a figure concerning the different types of judicial independence. And basically, they are all respected in our constitutional system. There is also a guarantee of personal judicial independence, and it is significant that such guarantee is given also with a view to the administrative justice that we have in Italy, the members of the Council of State, of regional administrative courts, as well as of the Court of Auditors. There is, and this is one of the bones of contention, there is a major judicial council, which is called Consiglio Superiore della Magistratura, which is established directly by the Constitution. And there are three minor judicial councils, and I use this word minor not to convey the meaning that the other parts of the judiciary are less important, but simply because those three judicial councils have not been established directly by the Constitution, but by legislation. And incidentally, let me say that I've been a member selected by Parliament of two of those judicial councils, those for the judges of the Court of Auditors and that for tax judges, which explains why my view of this problem is not simply theoretical, but also takes very much into account the real dynamics of judicial independence. A fourth important element is that the Constitution is very clear in requiring that the selection and recruitment of judges must be based on open competition, the concours, as the French call it. There are, however, two exceptions which must be considered. That is to say that the executive branch, following our tradition, which is very similar to that of France in this respect, still retains the power to appoint 1/4 25% of the members of the Council of State and on the Court of Auditors. It must be added that these judges generally are included for the Council of State in the sections which discharge advisory functions, and for the Court of Auditors in the panels which carry out checks on the public finances. But still, this is a controversial element because several public lawyers argue that this undermines, at least partially, the independence of the body as a whole, even though there is nothing to object to individual judges. Fifth, disciplinary proceedings against judges are managed only by judicial councils, and there's a constitutional duty to give reasons for every measure concerning the suspension, sanctioning, or removal of judges. And as I've been a member of two of these bodies, I can tell you that all these guarantees are taken very, very seriously, with proceedings where the right to be heard is protected in many of its manifestations, including the right to have legal assistance and so on. And last but not least, not only are the salaries and pension schemes of judges in Italy protected from executive interference, and there are also some judgments of the Italian Constitutional Court emphasizing this protection. But I have to add that the level of those salaries are relatively high in comparison, for example, with those of French and German judges. So the argument could be made that there's a high standard of protection of judicial independence. However, and I kindly ask the organizers to move to the next slide, that concerning a judicial accountability, there's according to many observers, there's a mismatch between how judges perceive their action and how they are assessed from outsiders. The level of self-assessment which is made by judges is very, very high. An average of 99% of judges received either high or very high positive assessment in previous years, just a little bit less last year. However, there are several critical voices. For example, and I'm quoting from a recent book written by Sabino Cassese, a former minister and vice president of the Italian Constitutional Court, a book written significantly on what the French called le gouvernement des juges, il governo dei giudici. And he points out that judges do not perform adequately their main functions, that is to say, to judge, and thus enjoy a diminishing social consensus. For example, they are often, Cassese says always, in my experience, I would say that there are often delays, and there is clear evidence that there is an outstanding judicial backlog, 6 million of disputes between civil and criminal cases, while in the field of administrative law and administrative justice, the situation is far better. There is also, Cassese argues, an evident abuse of certain powers which are held by judges, including the power to use preventive detection and wiretaps. And Cassese also argues, and this is an element which cannot be denied, that more than one third of the persons that are detained in Italy have not yet received a final ruling. And that also implies that the state is often requested to pay damages for unjust detention and delays in the administration of justice. Now, that said, let me give you a more detailed view of 3 indicators of delayed justice, which, as the Britons say, is always denied justice. One is the length of civil and criminal trials, in particular the length of civil trials, which is more than 7 years. That is the average. But if you consider also the intervention of the Court of Cassation, which is our 3rd level for civil and tax cases, and if you consider justice as a whole, so the first 2 levels plus the Court of Cassation, then the average to obtain justice becomes 11 years. And I have personally found some cases in which the Court of Cassation gives the final judgment after 12 or 13 years. Now, that is simply too much. Still another indicator concerns the productivity of judges. For example, those of the Court of Auditors, who in some regions write only 10, 11, or 12 judgments every year. And even though they say, oh, but my judgments were particularly important, that is questionable. Let me just add that in Italy, several judges do not exercise only judicial functions, but they also perform other functions, for example, as members of government cabinet or legal offices of ministers. And Cassese, again, gives a very interesting indication. That is to say, 200 judges held positions outside the judiciary in 2021, and several of them were in the Ministry of Justice. That brings me to the last slide, that concerning why our topic is so politically contentious. Now, as a consequence of the rise of populist parties in the next 10 or 12 years, and particularly in these legislature, there have been an increasing contrast between populist parties with charismatic leaders who constantly fight against a corrupted elite or the deep state, or judges who try to prevent our policies from being performed. And that conflict has been particularly evident in the field of immigration, with civil judges contesting the governmental decision to open new areas for keeping immigrants outside Italy, in Albania. And there's also an evident conflict and sharp conflict between some criminal prosecutors and some members of our government. Now, what is the upshot? What is the consequence of all these? The ongoing constitutional reform of the judiciary, which, as I said earlier, will culminate in a referendum in 2026. In brief, Parliament approved a constitutional bill with a vast majority, but without reaching the 2/3 majority, which would have avoided the referendum. The new reform provides a full and immediate separation of the careers of judges and prosecutors, in the sense that once they enter into the judiciary, their careers will be separated at the outset. There will also be 2 distinct judicial councils, one for judges and the other one for prosecutors, and a high disciplinary court, which will replace the existing CSM. Now, what are the likely consequences? Supporters and discontents have, not surprisingly, very different views. For supporters of the reform, it will increase judicial impartiality, and it will strengthen public trust in the judiciary, because there will be much better defined division of roles between judges and prosecutors. While the discontents, and they are quite numerous in Italy, not only judges, but also some political parties, they say that the reform will undermine the unity of the judiciary and will put prosecutors under the control of the executive branch. Now, there's no need for me to take side in this debate now. I just want to mention, as a public law professor, that it is very unfortunate that the National Association of Judges has decided to create a committee for promoting the popular vote against the bill, because that, whatever the intents of the members of this committee, that implies that there will be an even sharper opposition between the majority, which has promoted the reform, and the judges. And one may wonder whether this is safe for the nature of the debate that we are going to have in the next months, as well as for the proper balance between the executive branch and the judiciary, to which Montesquieu attached so much importance. Thank you so much.